Indian Railways. The Indian Railways has an eventful, illustrious journey of over 170 years. This journey is absolutely worth cherishing. One can experience this journey at the National Rail Museum. The National Rail Museum proudly houses the rich heritage of the Indian Railways. The museum has a magnificent indoor gallery and a mesmerizing outdoor yard. This outdoor gallery boasts of over 80 exhibits. Each exhibit offers a unique window into the glorious past. Back in the early 1800s, the East India Company began strengthening its hold in India. Soon, they realized a cheap mode of transport was crucial to connect the Indian heartland to its ports. This need became the prime catalyst in the inception of Indian Railways. Thus began the journey of railways in India. Initially, in 1836, a short experimental railway line was constructed near Chennai, then Madras. Within a year, the first operation railway in India, the Red Hill Railroad, was built. It was used for transporting granite to the port of Madras. Gradually, the rail network was expanded to other key destinations. In 1845, the first railway company of India was formed. It was the East India Railway. The museum exhibits the Ramgutti steam engine belonging to the East India Railway. It is amongst the oldest exhibits at the museum. Soon, the Great Indian Peninsular Railway was incorporated in 1849. In the year 1851, the first freight carrier train was built. It ran a distance of 10 kilometers to carry clay between Roorkee and Pirankaliar. And then, in 1853, came the first passenger train. It had 14 carriages that traversed a 21-kilometer journey between Bombay and Thane. It was pulled by 3 locomotives named Sahib, Sindh, and Sultan. One can witness them at the NRM. In 1855, the Express and the Fairy Queen were commissioned. The museum holds the Fairy Queen, which is the oldest functional steam engine. The Fairy Queen also appears in the Guinness Book of Records for being the oldest steam engine in service. By 1856, there were about 10 operational railway lines. Barring the Bombay line, most of the railroads were owned by princely states. These lines sometimes were also funded by royalty but had to seek approval from the Company Raj. By now, the Company Raj had established itself well, bringing industrial and mechanical growth to its colonies. But a revolution was brewing against the brutal Company Raj. And then the movement for freedom began, the fearless uprising of 1857. The 1857 movement was brutally crushed and the Queen became the ruling monarch of India. Over a dozen different regional railways were set up. There were striking differences in standard of service. The European passengers and royalty travelled luxury class, while the commoners were devoid of even basic necessities. In the early 1860s, various experiments like providing passenger amenities such as toilets, lights and fans were undertaken. Everything was first introduced in the first-class carriages. Double-decker carriages with 2-tier seating in second and third class came up to avoid overcrowding. The year 1862 saw the establishment of the first loco works in Jamalpur, Bihar. At that time, it just meant assembling locomotives using imported parts. The museum stores the oldest of cranes and machinery used in this era to build the railroads. This decade saw the first ever of many things like bridges, development of platforms, and printing of the timetables. The end of this decade saw the beginning of the first mobile post office service on the train. In the next decade, the 1870s, the meter gauge started expanding. The first commercial meter gauge line was laid. In the year 1875, the Prince of Wales visited India. A special train was commissioned with the best coaches and saloon, including a diner. The museum has now reclaimed this saloon. It has been precisely restored and is exhibited in its full glory. The decade of 1880s saw a time of gloom with a series of severe famines all across the country. In such a time of distress, the railways shouldered the responsibility of carrying relief material and supplies. The museum holds a B-class locomotive, the first locomotive series built for the DHR in 1889. Ironically, this decade also saw the construction of luxury saloons and coaches for the royalty. The museum holds the Baroda Saloon commissioned by the Gaikwads of Baroda. The beauty of this saloon is the intricately designed gold enameled ornate ceiling. The museum also houses the saloon of the King of Mysore. This saloon was a part of the special three-coach train used by the then Maharaja Krishnaraja Vodeyar. This coach could be run on both broad gauge and meter gauge by changing the bogies. Original furnishings, beautiful floral paintings on the ceilings, and brass-fenced veranda have been restored to their original glory. In the 1890s, the Kalka-Shimla line was started. This has now been declared a UNESCO heritage site. An elegant rail car of the Kalka-Shimla section of the North Western Railway is preserved as well. This lightweight exhibit is provided with a bottle jack to turn the vehicle for return journey. While roaming in the outdoor gallery, we notice an interesting single rail track. The Patiala State Monorail operates on this unitrack. The monorail is a proud possession of the NRM. It was in this decade that the monorail moved from being oxen-driven to being driven by imported locomotives. In this unusual single rail arrangement, nearly 98% of the weight of the vehicle is taken by a single rail. The rest lies on additional wheels on an outrigger running on the road surface by the sides of the track. The eruption of the First World War impacted the economies of all the nations. The war impacted the growth pattern of the railways too. Railway production was diverted to meet the needs of British forces stationed outside India. At the end of the war, Indian railways were in a state of total disrepair. All services were either downgraded or restricted. This is also the decade when the Morris engine, a firefighter, was acquired by the Nizam of Hyderabad. This World War I vintage vehicle is one of the prime exhibits of the National Rail Museum. It is maintained in great working condition and all its original parts have survived. Even today, it is the front runner at the vintage vehicle rallies. Belonging to this decade, the museum holds Garrett, the heaviest and the most powerful steam locomotive ever used in the Indian railways. These locomotives were so powerful that they could easily haul a load of 2,400 tons even on steep gradients. As the World War II began in 1939, railways was under strain once again. Locomotives, wagons and track material was taken from India to the Middle East. Over 25 branch lines were completely cannibalized for this purpose. Railway workshops were used to manufacture shells and other military equipment. The railways was left in poor shape by the end of the war. Then arose the landmark day of India's independence. The railways gradually became an entity of the Government of India. On 26 January 1950, the Chittaranjan Locomotive Works was established. This unit played an important role in indigenous construction of locomotives. One of the interesting exhibits at the museum is the Sher-e-Punjab, which was built indigenously. This locomotive hauled the last broad gauge steam train on Indian railways. Another interesting exhibit built in this decade is the fireless steam engine. This unique fireless locomotive has a pressure vessel that collects steam from a distant boiler. The National Rail Museum exhibits locomotives and coaches up to the 1960s. Another attraction of this outdoor yard is the Rail Garden. It is an amazing model with functional railways traversing different terrains across the country. It passes through various historic stations like Delhi Junction, Guna, CSTM, and Madras Central. Out in the garden, you also find a toy train running on a miniature track. This provides a joyous round trip of the entire outdoor gallery. Children and adults both love this ride. There is a unique rail restaurant whose architecture resembles a dome of the CST. This restaurant has an interesting food service. Here, trains deliver your food right at your tables. Every order is catered to the table by these small trains. Trains on this track are controlled by state-of-the-art technology. There are about 10 stations, each with a specialty of its own. In the garden, visitors enjoy snacks while playing board games on these specially designed tables. One could just relax and reminisce a day well spent watching the musical water fountain. Such a wonderful day at the outdoor gallery. One can only appreciate the illustrious and progressive journey of the Indian Railways. As we take a trip down memory lane, we are left in awe of the efforts taken by the museum in preserving these exhibits. A day spent at the NRM offers a glimpse into the extraordinary journey of the Indian Railways.